Oh, sorry, I don't have a fun costume for this one.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
As you can probably tell based on the thumbnail and the title of this video, today we're going to talk about Spider-Man. Also, fun fact, this is actually my second time filming this video because the first time, all of the footage was out of focus. I hope it works this time. Spider-Man made his first appearance in Marvel Comics' Amazing Fantasy number 15. He was created by writer Stan Lee and illustrator Steve Ditko. He's oftentimes referred to as the very first everyman superhero, an average guy who goes from zero to hero.
Mr. Stark, I'm being beamed up. But you said save the wizard. I can't breathe. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, what happened? Spider-Man has been adapted a lot. Like, a lot. He's been the subject of movies, TV shows, video games, and even a Broadway musical. So, for the sake of sanity, I'm only going to go over adaptations that I feel are relevant to our discussion today. They're also the most mainstream ones that you've probably seen or at least heard of. If you're about my age, your first exposure to a Spider-Man adaptation was probably Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man starring Tobey Maguire. The movie is pretty standard Spidey. Peter Parker is an orphaned teenager living with his elderly aunt and uncle in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, New York. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider while on a school trip, and develops spider powers. He enters a wrestling competition to try and earn some extra cash. We kill Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility, yada yada yada, etc, etc. This is a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He operates mainly in the immediate New York City area. He comes from a working class family and isn't very popular at school, to say the least. He also lives with elderly guardians, which, don't you worry, we'll get to you, hot Aunt May. Anyway, this is a pretty good starting point as far as modern adaptations go. I will mention, in the original comics, Peter is explicitly Jewish, which isn't something that really comes up or is hinted at in the Sam Raimi movies. Now that we have our starting point, let's move on to our first reboot. Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider-Man starring Andrew Garfield. Okay, yes, I skipped over a couple animated series and comics and things like that, but I'm only focusing on the big mainstream heavy hitters. Please stop writing that comment. The Mark Webb movies were definitely not as beloved as the Sam Raimi ones. I know this is kind of an unpopular opinion, but at least when these first came out, I actually really enjoyed these movies. Yes, even the sequel. It definitely digs more into the Parker family lore. This does admittedly kind of take away from the whole Peter Parker is a kid from a working class family and no one really special thing. Peter's parents were like fancy scientists in this adaptation. They also did away with Peter entering the wrestling competition to earn some extra cash. Also, Aunt May has gotten younger, but not that young yet. Peter does still primarily operate in the immediate New York City area, and his Jewish identity is still not addressed. Enter Miles Morales. Miles first swung onto the stage in 2011. I won't blame you if you unsubscribe for that. You have permission. He first appeared in Ultimate Fallout number 4. The Brooklyn-born teen takes over the title of Spider-Man after the death of his universe's version of Peter Parker. If you, like me, are kind of a normie when it comes to American superheroes, you're probably most familiar with Miles from 2018's Into the Spider-Verse. Y'all, I'm not gonna beat around the bush with this. This movie slaps entirely. I'm gonna scream if I'm not in focus. Like, Probably the best superhero movie I've ever seen. Definitely the best Spider-Man movie I've ever seen. You have Miles, this biracial kid from Brooklyn. His mother is a nurse and his father is, rather unfortunately, a cop. In his free time, he does graffiti with his uncle in abandoned subway tunnels. This kid rocks. And don't worry, you still want Peter? We got Peter. We got working class, middle-aged, divorced, elderly aunt, Jewish Peter. Neither of those your cup of tea? Don't worry. And Gwen, ballerina rock star Gwen. This movie really hit what Spider-Man has always been about. At least to me. The whole message of this film is anyone can be Spider-Man. Anyone can be a hero, which, was the point to begin with. The whole thing just leaves you with these warm, fuzzy feelings. It's also one of the very few adaptations that even so much as hints at Peter's Jewish identity. You want to know another adaptation that slaps? Let's talk about one of my favorite video games, the 2018 Spider-Man game for PS4. Now, there is a Miles Morales sequel for the PS5, but I don't have a PS5. So we're just going to be talking about the original. This game centers around a young adult Peter Parker, struggling to make ends meet at his job as an assistant to Dr. Octavius. He and MJ are also going through a breakup when we start the game. There is also a appropriately aged depiction of Aunt May, who spends her time volunteering at the local homeless shelter. In fact, this depiction of Peter Parker is such an everyman that about midway through the game, he gets evicted from his apartment because he can't make rent. Peter Parker, not your cup of tea? Good news. Miles is in this game. He's not Spider-Man yet, but he does get his Spider-Man powers at the end of the game. What he is a badass kid who gets shit done despite his lack of superpowers. Leading back to the anyone can be a hero message of Into the Spider-Verse. You spend this game swinging around New York City, stopping muggers and chasing pigeons and basic Spider-Man stuff. I love this adaptation. This is the Spider-Man that made me fall in love with the character. Well, I mean, the first Spider-Man I saw was Tobey, but it's like the ideas that video game Spider-Man represents. It's, okay, you get it. Or maybe you don't. Or maybe I'm not making sense. I don't know what I'm trying to say. A Spider-Man is a very pedestrian answer to the question, who is your favorite superhero? But I think, like with most pedestrian answers, there's a reason for that. There's a reason he's, sometimes she's, such a popular choice. Spider-Man is relatable. Peter Parker is a working class Jewish kid living with his widowed aunt in Queens. There's a lot for everyday people to relate to there. And if not, there's also a Spider-Man for biracial kids living in Brooklyn, or badass ballerina rock star ladies. The message of Into the Spider-Verse is anyone can be a hero, but that isn't just the message of that particular adaptation. It's been the message of Spider-Man since the very beginning. Well, it was. Until...
To become an Avenger, are there like trials or an interview?
Just don't do anything I would do.
Okay, listen, first things first. You are allowed to like MCU Spider-Man. He's honestly adorable, and I do not have anything against any of the actors or people involved in these movies personally. I do not know them. But what I do have a problem with is, well, they almost made him too cool? Too big of a deal. They took Peter Parker, introduced him to Tony Stark, and turned him into this like cool tech bro beta Tony Stark. He no longer operates in the immediate New York City area. He's now off fighting intergalactic villains in what seems like mere months since discovering his powers. You're not gonna see MCU Spider-Man fighting someone as pedestrian as, say, I don't know, Mr. Negative. There's also this weird anti-working class messaging in Homecoming. The main villain is Vulture. Okay, maybe he would fight Mr. Negative. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Vulture is a working class man trying to look after his family who's disgruntled at the destruction of New York City by the hands of the Avengers. It's just kind of weird to see Peter Parker facing off against the working class. I obviously get that it's more nuanced than that. He's also like dealing arms on the side. Like, he's obviously not a good dude, but on a very surface level, the messaging comes off very weird and muddled. There's also hot Aunt May, which is fine, I guess, but it just really adds to the polish that they've applied to this version of Peter Parker. Honestly, I think it could have worked. The setup was there for a really good Spider-Man adaptation. And I think what ruined it was, well, Tony Stark, who just comes swooping in with all the money and tech that a kid could ever ask for. Taking Peter in as his protege and giving him the privilege other Spider-Mans never got. Anyone can be a hero, but it does help if you have a billionaire benefactor. I'm sure I probably ruffled some feathers here, and I probably contradicted myself a bit too. But I hope what I'm trying to say has made some sort of sense. Like I said, MCU Spider-Man is fine. He's cute, and he had a good foundation. But the introduction of Iron Man into his life kind of threw things off for me. He wasn't my friendly neighborhood Spider-Man anymore. He was a full-blown Avenger. Yes, okay, I know he's an Avenger in the comics. Please stop typing that comment. Hi, my name's Ellen, and I love pissing off comic book fans. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. I tried to put into words what really rubs me the wrong way about MCU Spidey. I don't know if it worked though. If you liked the video, why not let the algorithm know by giving it a thumbs up, or sharing it, or leaving a comment, or you could even subscribe. If you really liked the video, you can support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or buying some merch. Patrons get fun little perks like blooper reels, access to the Discord, credit at the end of the video. Links to both of those things are in the link tree in the description. If you didn't like this video, your refund will be in the mail in 7 to 10 business days. Bye! Peter does still primarily operate in the New York City area.